You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 76 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Last episode, or I should say second last, because we had to squeeze in LeBron going to the Lakers topic, but we started the NBA draft hypotheticals with the what if Carmelo Anthony was drafted by the Pistons. In this show, we continue the series with what if the Blazers had selected Kevin Durant with the number one pick instead of Greg Oden. Now, this situation is twice as bitter of a pill to swallow if you're a Blazers fan, because the situation was almost identical to the 84 draft involving Michael Jordan and Sam Bowie. And you can believe that decision will be a future episode in this series. But it is truly impossible to ignore the similarities between the two scenarios. Kevin Durant was an explosive scoring swingman in college and was considered a player with seemingly unlimited potential on offense, just like MJ was. Greg Oden had shown glimpses of greatness on the defensive end at the center position, but just like Sam Bowie, his college career was marred by injuries. Now, looking back at 1984, and I promise you this will be a topic that will be covered in this series, but when we do look back at 1984, the Rockets, who had the number one pick in the draft, had all but confirmed that they were taking a larger one with that first pick. That left the Blazers with little to no doubt as to who would be available for them to draft with the number 2 pick. In 2007, Portland had won the draft lottery, so they held all the cards. And there was only two realistic options for them to draft, and that was either Greg Oden or Kevin Durant. Now, given what happened in 1984, there were concerns from the media and their fan base to, quote, take the safe pick in Kevin Durant. But instead, the Blazers went with Oden, who never came close to living up to expectations due to predictable injury issues. Durant, on the other hand, has emerged as one of the greatest scorers in NBA history, and depending on how long he plays, he could shatter some major records. But what if, and I don't mean to pour sand down the throats of Trail Blazers fans that are thirsty for success, but what if Portland hadn't repeated history and they had drafted Kevin Durant instead of Oden? How differently would the Blazers and the Thunder, but let's keep in mind that they were the Sonics at the time, how different would those organizations have been, let alone the entire NBA landscape? Is it as simple as the Blazers replacing the Thunder as the best runner-up team for a decade? Look, let's get right into it and find out. And in order to really get a grasp of the situation, we're going to have to apply some context to both the Seattle and Portland franchises. And we're going to begin with Seattle, and following a successful 2005 campaign where they reached the second round and they pushed the eventual champion Spurs to 6 games, Seattle struggled big time in 2006. And they only managed 35 wins despite having pretty much the same roster that they had in 2005. In 2007, it got worse, and they only claimed 31 victories. But with Ray Allen becoming increasingly disgruntled, the Sonics were forced into a rebuild situation. Luckily for them, the number 2 pick in the draft fell into their lap, despite having 30 wins. With that in their back pocket, they ended up dealing Ray Allen for the number 5 pick in the draft from Boston. That trade enticed Kevin Garnett to waive his no-trade clause to go to Boston and form what a lot of people feel is the first big three. It really isn't. The first big three goes way back to 1969 with the Lakers, with Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, and Wilt Chamberlain. But that's another topic for another day. And you might be asking what the relevance is of bringing up Ray Allen in all of this. Is Kevin Garnett wasn't willing to go to Boston unless if Ray Allen was there as well. Because he was looking at Boston with Paul Pierce. They hadn't made the playoffs in quite a few years either. Why would he be so willing to, because he was very loyal to Minnesota, why would he be willing to give up that legacy of loyalty to chase a championship when Boston wasn't ready either? Now, you may be asking yourself at this point, well, hold on a second, if the Sonics had drafted Greg Oden, wouldn't they have just traded Ray Allen as well? And we were in the same situation. Ray Allen goes to Boston for the number 5 pick. and then Kevin Garnett goes there. Well, not so fast, because if you think back, and as ridiculous as this sounds, but Greg Oden was actually considered the more NBA-ready player coming from college than what Kevin Durant was. Think back to the skill sets. Kevin Durant was very, very skinny. He could score the basketball, but scoring in college, you can get away with not being an athletic stud, right? But Greg Oden wasn't a scorer, and also he was considered a defensive presence. His defensive game was already seasoned well enough to at least contribute on the NBA level. Kevin Durant's offensive game was not considered ready to be dominant or at least contribute on a consistent basis. So it's likely that, considering they're only 2 years away from really challenging from the title with Ray Allen and Rashard Lewis and all those guys, if they add Greg Oden, who fills a major hole for them, would the Sonics have been willing to trade Ray Allen for essentially the number 5 pick in the draft? And it wasn't an overly deep draft. They ended up getting Jeff Green for him, it turned out to be quite a serviceable player. But Jeff Green for Ray Allen is not a fair trade. They were just looking to rebuild at that stage. And they knew they were going to rebuild around Kevin Durant, but it was going to take time. Whereas Greg Oden was ready to contribute immediately. Maybe he puts them back into championship contention, or at least contention for a playoff spot. Now, if Ray Allen never gets traded for the number 5 pick, Boston would also never get Kevin Garnett. And the big 3 never happens. And we have our very first change in NBA history. And it's a big one, for lack of a better term. And without the big 3, who would stand in the way of LeBron and the Cavs in the East? Especially in 2008, where the Cavs had made additions of people like Ben Wallace and Joe Smith. They really shored up their front line. Cleveland has added steady veteran leaders on top of LeBron, who is just beginning to show the world how great he is. And they being Cleveland, would run right through the conference and get back to the finals. Now, out west is where things really start to get interesting, though. Because with Ray Allen not going to Boston, Garnett is forced to stay in Minnesota. Now, if you remember back to 2007, 2008, and the rumors with Kevin Garnett, it was always centered around Boston, and it was also centered around LA. They were the most interested in his services. Now, with Boston out of the picture, the Lakers become a very enticing option. And clearly the front runner to get him with Kobe Bryant and Phil Jackson. Now, Los Angeles doesn't budge on their initial offer of Bynum and Kwame Brown. And with Kevin Garnett getting older and the Timberwolves continuing to plunge, Minnesota takes a deal. This trade sets up so many variables here. Do the Lakers still make a move for Pau Gasol? Remember, they only gave up Kwame Brown and the draft rights to Marc Gasol, along with spare parts. Or do they keep what they have and run with a lineup of Kevin Garnett, Lamar Odom, Radmanovich, Bryant, and Derek Fisher, along with Marc Gasol in the waiting and Trevor Ariza, Shannon Brown coming off the bench? The Lakers, though, sensing the opportunity, would pull the trigger, and they would trade Odom and Marc Gasol along with a couple of future first-rounders for Pau Gasol. Now, had they had known what a jewel they had in Marc Gasol, then I could see them holding off and not making this deal. But with Kobe desperate to get back to the finals, there's no way they would turn down this opportunity. And their new lineup is now Kevin Garnett, Pau Gasol, Radmanovich, Kobe, Fisher, with Ariza and Shannon Brown coming off the bench. These moves would send shockwaves throughout the league. And it brings us back to the East, with Greg Oden showing signs of his talents in the NBA, and by talents, I'm referring to being injured. Ray Allen becomes even more disgruntled. Cleveland may rule the East, but there's no way that they do not see the juggernaut emerging in Los Angeles, and they offer whatever pieces they can that they can afford to part with, i.e. not LeBron. The final deal for Ray Allen is Larry Hughes, Drew Gooden, and Delonte West for Ray Allen and Earl Watson. The new starting lineup for Cleveland is Ilgauskas, Ben Wallace, LeBron, Ray Allen, and Eric Snow. The point guard position is won by committee. But even though the starting point guard is either Snow, Watson, or Boobie Gibson, or even Damon Jones, we see our first glimpses of LeBron dominating the ball and really playing point guard. and the official point guards for the Cavs are being reduced to being either defenders or shooters, and not much else. Regardless, with their monstrous front line, and now Ray Allen spreading the court, the Cavs have the talent not just to get to the final, but to do some damage to whichever Western Conference team they face. The team that they do go up against, of course, is the Lakers, who tear through the West, and we finally get to see the Kobe-LeBron showdown in the playoffs. This series brings so many questions. The Lakers would have home court, and of course Kobe Bryant, but the Cavs have LeBron prior to the passive-aggressive LeBron with the bad habits on the defensive end, and who is more than capable of having great moments in the clutch. And with major questions still hovering over Pau Gasol and Kevin Garnett's ability to get the job done in critical moments. Like, let's be honest here, Pau Gasol, before coming to the Lakers, had never won a playoff game, forget a series, but a game, before coming to LA, and Kevin Garnett had only been out of the first round once in his career. And the added firepower of Ben Wallace and Ray Allen, the Cavs go one better than the previous season, and they shock the Lakers in 6 games and become the world champions in LeBron's 6th season. I can't believe that I came to that conclusion either. That's what we got. Absolute insanity. But let's get back to Greg Oden and Kevin Durant. Now, I mentioned earlier that Greg Oden was injured for much of his first season with Seattle, and the Sonics find themselves at the bottom of the league. Portland, on the other hand, with a solid nucleus of Brandon Roy, let's not forget how good he was in his prime, LaMarcus Aldridge, who admittedly it took some time for him to really find his game in the NBA, but once he did, there was no stopping him, and Kevin Durant, they barely made the playoffs with the number 8 spot, but the future is so bright with him. Now, with Portland entering the playoff mix, Denver dropped out. What also happens, or doesn't happen, is a trade for Allen Iverson. The 76ers still deactivated him for giving his blessings to the idea of being traded and not demanded, which was reported by much of the media at the time. And Iverson would find himself landing in Orlando alongside a young Dwight Howard in the offseason. The Miami Heat, with the ascension of the Lakers in the West, were unable to convince the Suns to take Shaq, and he too would not end up being moved prior to the deadline. Of all teams, though, Portland would be able to pick him up for Channing Frye, which, don't laugh, it's not the first time he replaced Shaq, by the way. Think back to the 2010 Suns. They replaced Channing Frye with Shaq. Oh, sorry, I should say Shaq with Channing Frye, and then ended up making the conference finals. Joel Prisbilla and Sergio Rodriguez, along with Steve Blake. Suddenly, Portland and Orlando have superstar veteran talent, or from yesteryear at least, to lead their young player development and are serious contenders in their conferences. The domino effect throughout the league does not end with free agency. Without Durant, the Sonics, who are still the Sonics at the time, but barely, they needed a small forward. Now, with the Bulls, they still have the first overall pick in the draft, and they still take Derrick Rose. There's nothing that could ever change that. But Seattle moves up to the second pick overall in the draft. And because of that, they're the ones that actually take Michael Beasley. Now, you might be thinking, well, that changes nothing because Beasley was taken number 2 overall in the draft. But in actuality, it changes everything. Because instead of Seattle reaching to get Russell Westbrook with the 4th pick, Westbrook slides all the way down to the 8th spot, which is where Philly is actually selecting. With Westbrook now in Philadelphia, this creates an entirely new situation taking place that we'll keep an eye on throughout this hypothetical. The rest of the draft goes as normal, with Love landing in Minnesota, Mayo going to Memphis, Eric Gordon going to the Clippers, etc. The major storyline heading into this season, apart from the Kobe-LeBron rivalry, is what will happen with Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade. Both of these guys are young, they're still developing if you can believe that as well, but they're also dominating individually. Conversely, their teams are struggling to build around them, and that's causing frustration. On top of that, their hometown franchises, the Knicks and Bulls, are very interested in their services, and they can offer them a chance to win as well as to come home. Paul Pierce's name is also circulating as Boston continues to develop the young players, but without Garnett or Ray Allen, they can't compete at the level that Paul Pierce honestly needs at this stage of his career. And he is dealt to Houston to team up with Yao Ming and T-Mac. What we also see is with LeBron claiming a title and the Cavs management showing the ability to surround himself with players that fit into his style, such as Ray Allen. Teams like New York and Miami aren't eager to unload players of any value to increase cap space in hopes to sign him in 2 seasons. Because of this, the Knicks pick up Chauncey Billups from the Pistons and become a much more appealing situation for Carmelo to arrive either via a trade or free agency. Heading into the 2008 and 2009 season, the contenders in the West are the Lakers with Garnett, Pau Gasol, Kobe Bryant, the Blazers with Shaq, Durant, Aldridge, and Brandon Roy, the Spurs with Duncan, Ginobili, Parker. There's another contender that's worth considering, and that's the Suns, who without the disastrous trade of Sean Marion for Shaq, find themselves still able to run their system without any major drama. There are also teams such as the Mavericks, Jazz, and New Orleans Hornets, who are not obviously the Pelicans yet, who are a stone's throw away from competing. In the East, the Cavs are the team to beat, but with an aging roster, they are not the clear-cut favourites. They face challenges from the Magic with Dwight Howard and Iverson, but it's clear at this point that the conferences are still skewed towards the West. This all changes when the Bulls are able to get waived for next to nothing as he threatens to sit out. Well, not next to nothing isn't correct, as they still have to give up Heinrich, Joakim Noah, and Ben Gordon for Wade and Udonis Haslem. The new Bulls starting lineup is Brad Miller, Tyrese Thomas, Luol Deng, Dwayne Wade in his prime, and Derrick Rose in his rookie season. And for the first time since Michael Jordan and the Bulls won in 1998, there was genuine excitement in Chicago for basketball. And Wade is considered a savior as the Bulls rocket to the best record in the East. The other major move that happens in the Eastern Conference is obviously Carmelo Anthony. With Denver missing the playoffs, they decided to unload talent at a record pace. The first piece to go is Melo, who receives very little interest outside of the Knicks after announcing that is the only place he will sign an extension with. But New York still finds a way to give up nearly half their roster, including all their real assets such as David Lee, Jamal Crawford, and their rookie Gallinari. But they still get their man, and he immediately signs an extension, so it all works out. The Knicks are significantly better, but there's no question that they need other players around him to contend. But just like Chicago with Wade, New York with Melo has a lot more excitement, and other star players become very interested in playing there. The focus of the basketball world, though, is still centered around the Lakers. After falling apart in the finals, Kobe, Garnett, and Pau Gasol come back fully focused and ready to regain basketball glory. Now, if you remember back to the 2009 Celtics, they were an insane 29-2 at one point, but injuries caught up with them. Instead of going for the Bulls' then record of 72 wins for a season, Phil Jackson manages minutes, and Garnett never blows out his knee towards the end of the season. The result is a 60-win season, but everyone is healthy. What Phil Jackson cannot avoid, however, is going up against the Rockets in the conference finals. Kobe is outplayed, as nearly anybody in NBA history would be, by the McGrady and Paul Pierce duo. But Garnett and Pau Gasol are significantly better in this playoff run, and the Lakers get back to the finals. In the East, Chicago has the top seed, but they still need to get through Cleveland. The sad thing is, the Cavs don't even make it to the conference finals, as the Magic with Howard and Iverson clean them up in the second round, once again robbing us of seeing the matchup of Wade versus LeBron in the playoffs. Orlando proves too much for the Bulls, and they make it to the finals to square off against the Lakers. Dwight Howard creates all kinds of problems for Kevin Garnett at this stage of his career, but Kobe is possessed to right the wrong of last year's finals, and the Lakers win in a tough but convincing series. In their first season in Oklahoma, the Thunder have all but given up on the Greg Oden era, as they plummet to the worst record in the league. Their reward for their ineptitude is the number 1 pick, and the chance to draft their hometown prodigy, Blake Griffin. After that, it becomes a free-for-all on one of the deepest drafts in NBA history. Minnesota, who lucked into the second pick, they take James Harden. Miami and Pat Riley can't pass up on the European sensation Ricky Rubio, but they ended up trading down to the number 5 spot where the Timberwolves are drafting again, and they snag Steph Curry. Yep, that's right. The genius of Pat Riley strikes again as he reaches for Curry, and the direction of NBA history takes another significant turn. In the off-season, grumblings start to appear out of Camp LeBron about the direction of the Cavs, and the race for the cap space, well, you guys are lucky I didn't work for ESPN back then, starts. The Knicks start offloading everybody not named Carmelo in hopes of teaming the two up. And Chicago still has a chance to get him, even with Wade there, as most of their contracts are coming off the books. Miami has cap space too, but without Wade, they seem to be a long shot. The other major candidate is surprisingly Portland. Shaq is now off the books, and all their stars are still on rookie deals. They hold off signing any free agents to long-term deals just in case. The 2010 season brings more of the same, with the Cavs and Bulls fighting for the top seed in the East. Cleveland pulls the trigger on bringing in Amari Stoudemire on the trade deadline, a deal that looks great on paper but is a complete disaster when paired up with LeBron, as James relegates him to being just strictly a jump shooter. This season, we finally see the LeBron-Wade matchup in the conference finals, but LeBron doesn't seem to be himself, and calls of whether he quit mid-season arise. And without Delonte West to blame, the criticism is high. Out west, the Lakers are still holding on, but Garnett is only a shell of himself at this stage of his career. And this is clearly Kobe and Gasol's team. They do make it back to the finals, but they had to withstand a furious challenge from Portland. It would have been incredible to have seen Shaq on Portland in that series, but there was no chance of that happening with LeBron about to hit free agency. Instead, Shaq finished out his career on the Spurs with a whimper, just like he did with the Celtics. The Bulls and Lakers squared off, but with a depleted front line due to letting so many players go for cap space, the Lakers punished the Bulls on the glass, and they clean up with another championship ring. Now at the season over, this is when the real chaos begins. The decision is every bit of the attention-seeking circus as its real-life counterpart. And despite the Knicks' best efforts to bring him to New York, LeBron does go west. Look, I'll let you make a Delonte West joke there. I'm not going to. But LeBron does go west to play for the Blazers. Suddenly, a team with LaMarcus Aldridge, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Brandon Roy, the Blazers look as good on paper as any team in the history of the league. The scary thing isn't even the assembly of talent, it's their youth. And with the Lakers and Spurs showing signs of slowing down, it becomes a question of how many rings they will get before it's all said and done. What happens as a result of this is an exodus of talent to the Eastern Conference, as a lot of fringe playoff contenders now see the writing on the wall, and they can't compete now or in the foreseeable future with this Portland team. One of the first examples of this is a disgruntled Chris Paul being traded to the Knicks for future picks and expiring deals. Carlos Boozer lands in Miami and will be a valuable addition in the pick-and-roll game with Steph Curry. Steve Nash is traded back to Dallas to reunite with Dirk. The Spurs replace Shaq with Amari Stoudemire. Paul Pierce is still desperate for his first ring and signs with Chicago. The draft leads to a variety of different scenarios as well. Philadelphia, after getting the number 1 pick, take John Wall to play alongside Russell Westbrook. The Heat roll the dice on Paul George towards the end of the lottery, and Oklahoma takes a gamble with Derek Favors in a desperate attempt to build their front line into a force. None of these moves make a big difference, as everyone is enamored with what's going on in Portland. But it takes longer than expected for the team to gel. Injuries begin to hit Brandon Roy, and LeBron volunteers himself to take over the offense. With LeBron dominating the ball, young studs like Durant and Aldridge are getting frozen out in Portland, and the Blazers struggle mightily throughout the season, but they scrape their way to home court advantage in the West, only to be shown the door by a tough-as-nails Memphis team with Zach Randolph, Marc Gasol, Mike Conley, and Tony Allen in the first round. The exit opens up the doors for the Mavs to walk right to the finals, and they do, and they are met by a familiar foe in Dwayne Wade. The Bulls with Wade and a hungry Pierce, along with Derrick Rose, who's in his prime, cause all kinds of problems, and the Bulls knock off the Mavericks in 6 games. Despite the Bulls being champions, they are still not the capital of the basketball world. All the talk is about the capitulation of the Blazers and what they can do to fix it. Time is not on their side, as contracts are about to expire for Aldridge and Roy. And next season, obviously Kevin Durant. In a shocking move, LaMarcus Aldridge has had enough of being relegated to the 4th option, and he heads to Miami to play alongside Boozer and Curry, which leaves the Blazers no choice but to sign Brandon Roy to a big deal and a long deal despite his injury problems. It also places the Blazers with the reality of only being able to rely on LeBron and Durant to carry the load for much of the season. The draft sees Oklahoma grab Kyrie Irving to play alongside Blake Griffin, Derek Favors, and Michael Beasley, and suddenly they have playoff aspirations. Miami is able to pick up Kemba Walker in the mid-first round, and now they have a lineup of Aldridge, Boozer, Steph Curry, and Kemba Walker. The Knicks' ascension continues with Carmelo and Chris Paul, and Chris Bosh returns to Texas to play for the Spurs alongside Tim Duncan after the Amari contract expires. The Lakers, who dominated the league for so long, find themselves outside the conversation of contenders for the first time since the Kevin Durant era actually began. And unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to wrap this episode up. There's a couple of reasons for that. I've been tossing up the idea of writing an NBA hypotheticals book for quite some time, and it's not just related to trades. But I've been receiving such good feedback for the first one, and hopefully I receive some good feedback for this one as well, that it's just accelerated the progress for me writing about what would have happened if Michael Jordan was traded, or if he was drafted by the Blazers, or the Rockets traded for him, or the Clippers traded for him, or if he went to New York. That's just one guy, right? Or if his career never really even took off because, remember, his broken foot and the risk he took playing on that broken foot in his second season. What if he never truly recovered from that, for example? So there's a lot of NBA hypotheticals that I want to really sink my teeth into, and to show how fragile the NBA landscape truly is. I mean, I think I've sort of illustrated that just from the first 2 episodes of this series. So what I'm going to do is I will complete this, but it'll be a part of the book. And because I don't want to shortchange it and just, spend 30 seconds or, the Blazers win this championship or the Rockets win this championship. No, I want to explain how certain players get to certain places, why they don't go to other places, for example, and base that off historical evidence. So I will be writing a book about this as one of the chapters, and I'll be letting you guys know. But in the future, I'll only be going 5 seasons deep. So I don't go 15 seasons deep, because that's just too much. Because then otherwise it will turn into a marathon podcasting session, which will take me about a month to do every single episode. So from now on, it will just be 5 seasons deep, and then the rest of it will be covered in the books. And then at some point, I probably will read them for the podcast, like I did with the Warriors versus the Bulls, the 2017 Warriors versus the 96 Bulls, for example. I should answer some of my emails asking how the 96 Bulls would go up against the 2018 Warriors, and I'll get to that at some point in the off season. But just to give you guys a heads up, that will be the new book coming out. And then once that comes out, you'll be able to read it all up and tell me how wrong I am, or how much you agree with me, or whatever. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for listening. I'm glad to have your company once again, and I hope you guys take care, and I'll catch you in next week's episode, which will be what if how would the NBA look had the Hornets never traded Kobe Bryant for Vlade Divac? And that's, of course, continuing with the NBA Draft Hypothetical series. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll catch you guys next time.